Every family is so excited about a new baby, and have a right to be. They're cuddling immortality. They are cuddling a future generation, and it's exciting. I have experienced that, and it is exciting. In my teaching efforts for you and for the world, a new baby is a new series of lessons. And so we come to you with something that I think you will always remember, and you will want the tapes to play them again and again. It is called imagination. Say imagination. Imagination. The hidden force of human destiny. We will begin with, I have imagination, to show you that, being just like you, I have imagination. Then we will continue in the birth of human imagination. Where did it come from? Then we will speak with you about creative imagination. That there is something in our imagination that gives birth to empires, birth to fortunes, birth to beautiful buildings, lovely bridges across waters, beautiful automobiles. Imagination is a tremendous force, creative imagination. Then we will deal with passive imagination, when the imagination gets sick and it's not functioning as it should. And then we will deal with sensual imagination, imagination related to to sensuality. And then we will deal with drug-induced imagination. Alcohol and drugs can produce imaginations that are never real. We will deal with that subject. And then we will deal with the imagination of the ungodly. There's a difference between the imaginations of a person born again and a person that is ungodly. And then we will deal with spiritual imagination. And I know that will excite you. Now remember, according to Jesus, every imagination of the heart will be revealed one day. That shows us the importance of imagination. And then when we consider all great events and all great achievements have their basis in imagination. So therefore, imagination can grow, it can be fed, it can be taught, it can increase, and imagination can be guided. It can be guided into good, or it can be guided into evil. And so you have the control, no one else, over your personal imagination. In our first lesson, I just called it, I have imagination. And let us begin in the book of 1 Chronicles, chapter 28 and verse 9. Here we have a veteran, a senior statesman named David. He is speaking to a beginner, a starter, a young man. And he said, "You, Solomon, my son," that sounds like a daddy, don't it? "Know thou the God of thy father." Isn't that a strong, strong statement? That the father had something worth knowing. He says, "Know the God of your father." Oh, that is so strong. God help fathers to have a God that they can bring their sons to. It says, know him. And then it says in the next line, serve him. Not only know him, some people know about God, but they don't serve him. So he told the young man, I am an older man now. I'm getting ready to leave this earth. My son, I want you to know God, and the God of your own father, the God that I trusted, you trust. Serve him, and with a perfect heart. There's no other way to serve God. Half-hearted people don't really serve him. With a perfect heart and with a willing mind. Now this is in your area of imagination. Serve him with a willing mind, that your mind will function in this tremendous business of imagination. It says, the Lord, which means Jehovah, and Jehovah, he searches all hearts. Yeah, you better believe it. God knows your hearts. God knows your imaginations. If you're going to sit around and fantasize, God knows your insides. And so many people says, oh, as long as I fantasize, it's not wrong. God is going to, Jesus said that he would judge you by what you wanted to do. He said that a man that lusteth after a woman has already committed adultery with her. So we must get a hold of your imagination. We must get a hold of the imagination of this country. and it's time for us to know first the source, from which it comes, and the guidance that's available to our imaginative propensities that can change our lives, our communities, our families, and the world in which we live. So he said, this God that I serve, he searcheth all hearts. Say all. You better believe it now. All hearts. Now here's the text right here. And understandeth all the imaginations of the thoughts. Now, you got two truths here. One is God understands imaginations. That means he understands the functioning on the inside of your brain. He understands that. And so he says he understands all the imaginations of the thoughts. Now that is where imagination originates in thoughts, and that God, not the deed, anybody can see the deed, God sees the thought. God knows your thought life. Until we can correct your thought life, we can't correct your actual natural life. You have to get on the inside. You have to learn to discipline the thought life before you can discipline the life of the hands. It's always been humorous to me that in Arab countries, if you steal something, they cut off your hand. Well, honey, the hand didn't do it. Jesus says adulteries come out of the heart. Yeah, thieving, stealing comes out of the heart. Yeah, you can cut off a man's hand. He can take a bite of an apple and run with it, if you cut off both of them. And I've seen some people that could pick things up with their toes. You're only dealing with an effect and not with a cause. Get it now? We are going to deal in this mighty series called Imaginations, the Hidden Force of Human Destiny. We want to deal with it in not only effects, but in causes. If we can correct this, we can correct the whole world. Imagination, see it clear across the sky, big, bold, mighty, and then put behind it the hidden force of human destiny. Your destiny relies upon your imagination, and we want you to move into that. So God understands the imaginations of the thoughts. If you seek him, David said to his son, if you seek him, he will be found of you. Now you better believe that. You just better believe it. But if you forsake him, he will cast you off forever. Now, you couldn't have had a greater man of experience than David. He had a very spectacular and colorful life. He knew how to train up a boy. Whether he followed it or not would be his own determination. Daddy can tell you how to live, but he can't live it for you. You have to live it yourself. I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, and lived over in Pascagoula, Mississippi, and Laura, Mississippi, and Mobile, Alabama, and Panama City, Florida. And that was my total childhood till I went out to preach in the crescent of the Gulf of Mexico and around to the Mississippi River. And so as people keep saying everybody was poor those days, well, more or less, I can't remember when my father didn't own a car, and lived in a good house. Of course, he worked in shipyards and what they call a roundhouse, where they made and created and repaired automotives. So he was a smithy. He worked with steel in these large companies. So I can't remember when we didn't have an automobile and a nice place to live and plenty of food to eat. And so, but we still consider that we were poor because we didn't have as much as the man that owned a sawmill and the man that owned as much as a clothing store. So we relatively say we were reared poor. We had to be careful with our money and so forth. because we had no tremendous assets, just had a day-by-day laboring situation. Though I was born poor, I was endowed with a tremendous imagination. Now, I don't think anybody gave it to me except God. But in all of our family, I think I must have had the wildest imaginations. And in our neighborhood, maybe I led the way in imagination, because I imagined everything that was imaginable, of what I was going to be and what I was going to do and all about it. So I was just rich in imagination. And that has no assets to it. For example, a man named Mr. Gaddis in our city owned a select men's clothing store and catered to the well-off people of that city. He at the Pines Country Club, just out of town, he was a member of it. And I only got to know him by being his caddy. I wasn't very big, but I was as tall as his golf bag. And he was such a nice person. I wasn't more than 10 when I began to caddy for him. I don't know how they let little kids caddy, but he liked me. And he would come to the club and says, is Lester here? And I said, here, because I looked for his car. That great, big, beautiful car that he drove with a chauffeur. He just sat in the back seat. And so I would fantasize. One day, I am going to own a store like Mr. Gaddis. And I could see my store. And that I didn't do anything but just stand and look at the people coming in. Oh, I could see it. I had imagination. He would let me swing his clubs. And if I didn't know how to swing it, he would place my hands on the club so I could swing the golf club. And I thought that was great. And when they had what they call Caddy's Day out at the club, maybe once a month, he would tell me, says, Lester, you're welcome to use my clubs on Caddy's Day. Whew, for a millionaire to tell a poor boy who is a caddy, son, you can use my clubs. You talk about imagination. I saw myself as a professional, which God knows I am not, you see. I saw myself as a clubhouse man, walking around the clubhouse, having drinks and eating and bringing the lovely ladies out, Oh, talk about fantasizing. Man, I was born with it. I am so glad the day came when God redirected imagination in my life. Yeah, in my life, because this thing was creating images within me of my future and my destiny and the destiny of anybody that I touched. I was going to plan their destiny along with mine. And so I discovered early in life what imagination was. Now, not only in that way, but I went way off into the left field. The movies in the late 20s and maybe early 30s were getting on to the miracle men. They could grab a train, off of a horse's back at 50 miles an hour, and they could have a man from space just to come in there, and they were getting into the mysterious part of movies, into the supernatural element of movies. And man, I thought I could fly. I tried to build up muscles, working at it on bars, and when I saw them fly in the movies, I sneaked the umbrella. They used to have those big umbrellas, big old black umbrellas that big enough for 3 people to get under. And I got one of those and got me a ladder and climbed up on top of the house. And I was going to be the man on the flying trapeze, I tell you. So I opened up the umbrella and held it up as high as I could and jumped off the house. Well, imagination can just go so far and reality takes over, you see. Gravitation took care of it. The umbrella went to pieces, broke all to pieces, could never be used again. And my sore feet caught the ground, and I could hardly walk for a while. And I discovered that imagination needed some reality related to it. That it was all right to fantasize, but hook reality to it, or you might get yourself into some problems. And then I began to see men, and I would fantasize, well, like Mr. Gaddis, for example. Billy Sunday, the famous Sawdust Trail evangelist, came to the city, our city. And when he would come, he'd put up his own wooden tabernacle, seating several thousand people. And he did that because they had no PA system, where he could direct his voice through pieces of wood here and pieces of wood there. And he learned how to throw his voice very strong. And so we went to hear Billy Sunday almost every night he was in town. Now you should have seen me at home. I'd take off my coat, lay it down, jump on a bed, then onto a chair. I was Billy Sunday. And I would go and watch him. I didn't sleep in those meetings. I slept in some church services, but not Billy Sunday services. And I'd go and watch him. He'd jump on the pulpit and, man, I like that. The pulpit was usually a place to lay notes. Well, he was on there with his feet. Every boy would like that. Then he'd run get the piano stool and get on top of the piano stool. That's where the pianist would sit down, to play. Well, he was walking it on top of it. Then he'd leave the platform and run down through the audience. Never saw a preacher leave a platform. Man, he was my kind. Well, wasn't saved, don't think that. I was only fantasizing, living in my world of fancy. I was a king of imagination. And I didn't see Billy Sunday. I saw, I saw Lester Sumrall on the piano stool, on top of the pulpit, swinging his coat around his head, with his necktie off and in the other hand. Oh, yeah. The world of imagination. It's an exciting world if we understood it. I don't think I've ever heard a sermon on imagination that I can remember, Yet, imagination is a hidden force, and it relates itself to human destiny. It is so important to understand imagination. And yet, I don't know of very few people that have any comprehension of actually the powers and the forces of imagination that is in their total being, that they should, get a hold of them. They should understand them. More than that, they should utilize them. God put them there for your use. Now, maybe one of the greatest feats of imagination in my life would be when I was 18 and a half years old. I began preaching when I was 17 because God healed me of tuberculosis and told me that I had to preach. So I was a minister from 17. By the time I'd preached mostly in little country schoolhouses and brush arbors, from Florida north toward Tennessee. That in Tennessee, God showed me a vision of the nations of the world in their lost condition without Christ, without God, and without hope, and told me that their blood was required at my hands. Now that's the reason I have ministered in over 100 nations of the world and in over 1,000 cities of the world. I am carrying out the vision that God showed me and the call of God saying that I was responsible. When you're responsible, you don't go there on vacation. You don't go over there just to look to see what difference there is between their culture and yours. When God has told you that you're responsible for their salvation, you go over there preaching, and you go over there giving an altar call, an appeal to make a decision for the Lord Jesus Christ. So you go on real strong business when God sends you there. But from the time I saw that vision, my powers of imagination It's impossible for me to relate to you the forces of imagination that came into being. I saw myself speaking Chinese. I don't. That was my imagination. I saw myself speaking Japanese. I saw myself speaking the Indian languages, African languages. And I saw people that could not be numbered. There were so many that nobody could count them out there. And I was the little Billy Sunday. I was the man speaking to those people. I lived that day and night. I dreamed it in my dreams. I told a couple of ministers, when you're young, you shouldn't talk too much. People don't understand you. Sometimes they call it pride. Because I told a couple of ministers, I said, I see myself speaking to vast multitudes. They said, that's pride, son. So I had to be quiet about it and say nothing about it. But that glorious power of envisioning imagination, of envisioning the future, welled up within me. Well, I've seen it, you see. Yeah. Spoken in Dr. Cho's church there in Korea, and you can see people as far as you can see. You see people. In the Great Crusade in the Philippines, we saw people until you couldn't identify people, where it was like a dot on a pin, you know. The policeman called it 100,000, and we dropped it down to 60,000 because nobody can count them after 10 or 12,000 anyway. They count blocks and block them out. But you get so many heads out there, no chairs, just solid people as far as you can see. Then I would give the altar call. One night I said, no women permitted to move, just men. I want men's night in this crusade. Over 5,000 men came to receive Jesus. That was a fulfilling of my imagination. There they stood in this big open space for the altar. And there were 5,000. I said, man, they all have a woman. That makes 10,000. They have at least 2 children. 20,000. Here we got a whole town converted. One night, one altar call, one sermon, and 20,000 precious souls moving toward heaven. That was the fulfillment of imagination. I had seen that years before, you see. Years before. I'd seen this. And so here we find the powers and the force and the strength, and you might say the beauty of imagination coming to fruition, coming to reality, coming into being in my own life. How beautiful it is. I just want you to know before we begin these strong lessons on imagination, that imagination is not wrong. That imagination is a thing that you should permit it, but don't let it become a time waster. That's all some people do. They don't ever do anything else, you see. And so those people never bring anything. They've been dreaming years ago and they're still dreaming. They've been imagining. There are men that imagine they're rich, but you can't buy goods in the store with that. You can't buy a new automobile with that. So imagination is a starter. It is a prompter. And if you could use it for what God gave it to you for, it's very valuable and very beautiful. I love to imagine. I still imagine. I haven't lost my faculties of imagination, of seeing the unborn, of believing for the impossible, for the reaching out for the improbable through the strength, the force, and the power of imagination. God is so good. God is so great. And God wants you to have all the resources that He's put within you. This is born of your solical parts. It's in the area of your mental faculties, the brain, the mind. And this is a section and a portion of it that you can take it, develop it, use it, and it can become one of the most profitable things you've ever had. So, continue with imagination, but don't let it stay there. It is just a step on the road, a beautiful step. It's like a man wants a house, and the architect draws a picture of it, and he said, I like that. Well, he doesn't have a house. He has an imagination. That's what could be. That's what is possible. That's what you can reach out for, you know, but you don't have it yet. You're going to have to, you know, get it, you know, directly from God. So why don't you today harness your imagination, purify your imagination, and put it to work for your own life, for your own soul. So I saw myself in this state of imagination, reaching out until it became one of the most remarkable things. It became the fullest concept of what God had promised me through a vision, if you wish to call it that, an imagination that I had when I was a boy. Was that mighty revival that stirred the whole nation of the Philippines.